Hi, friends. My name is Katie LaShawn, and welcome to our presentation today. Today, we're going to be talking about an incredibly important and timely topic in our classrooms. We're going to be speaking about social emotional learning for English learner success. So SEL and ELS. We hope you enjoy our little play there on letters. Again, my name is Katie, and I am joined by my incredible colleague here at the University of Notre Dame, Claire Roach.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
All right, friends, we're going to do just as we do everything. We're going to begin in prayer this morning or this afternoon, whenever you're able to join us. So please take a moment and bow your heads with us, please. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, thank you for the opportunity to encounter you and others. Animate my work that I may embrace my students and their families who so beautifully reflect the diverse and universal church. Inspire my efforts to educate the whole child, celebrating the cultures and languages that enrich our school. Bless my efforts to empower children and families to recognize and employ their own unique gifts and talents to renew our community in your image. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, thank you so much for joining us. This is a topic, particularly the topic of English learners, that is near and dear to our heart. I dare say it's what gets us out of bed in the mornings, is to better understand our English learners and the ways in which our Catholic schools are enriched and graced by culturally and linguistically diverse children. Because of this belief, this propels our mission here at the University of Notre Dame and our English as a New Language program. And that mission, I think, is shared with many of you. And that is to cultivate teacher leaders who work to ensure that English learning children are thriving in our Catholic schools. So today, when we talk about social emotional learning, we're really going to be honing in on what it means to have our English learners thriving in 5 specific ways. So we're here to serve you and your English learners. So we can't wait to get started.
And we also want to let you know that we've created something, a guide, a learning guide, to help accompany you through this webinar today and to help support your learning. So what I'd like to invite all of you to do, if you haven't done already, is take a peek at this graphic organizer. You can find it at the website, ENL's website, enl.nd.edu. Is that right, Katie?
You're right. We're working on, you're totally right. Close enough.
If you go to the Notre Dame ENL website and you scroll down to these 4 circles and you click on Innovative Resources, you will find at the bottom of this page a location where you can click and print our study guide for you today. So I invite you to hit pause, find the ENL website at ace.nd.edu/ENL and print that graphic organizer. Additionally, as good teachers, we want to make sure that you understand what our goals for you are today in our time together. So our hope is that by the end of this webinar, you will be able to define SEL, have a broader understanding of what socio-emotional learning is and how it relates specifically to the unique needs of English learners or emergent bilingual children, that you recognize socio-emotional learning as a core pillar of Catholic education. And finally, and very importantly, that you can add 5 to 10 strategies aligned with the core competencies of socio-emotional learning that are very effective at meeting the needs of your English learning population. So those are our goals for today. Let's jump in. Katie?
Thank you, Claire. Absolutely. So we know that socio-emotional learning is something that you've absolutely probably heard about. And if not, you've probably already done some professional development in this realm. We know that it's something that many of us are curious about. So I want to start here with a little bit of framing about what socio-emotional learning is. And then throughout our presentation today, we're going to layer this with what it means to kind of put on this lens of serving English learners. So the first piece here is, let's read this quote together. Socio-emotional learning is a base of knowledge or skills that help students to thrive personally and academically, to develop and maintain positive relationships, to become lifelong learners, and to contribute to a more caring and just world. This definition comes from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, so CASEL, CASEL. So that website and that resource, that collaborative, is just immensely helpful as you're diving into this world of socio-emotional learning. So if you look at our concentric circles here, you'll see that there are 5 core competencies of SEL, and we're going to go through each of these 5 today. And we believe deeply that our students need to have skills in each of these 5. So the first one is self-awareness, followed by self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And I really like the way they've outlined it here because they have these kind of 5 core competencies together. And outside of this, they talk about, or they're demonstrating here, how there are classroom effects, there are school effects, family and caregivers play a part in this, as well as overall community. And so as you're going through and you're learning more about SEL overall, I want you to think about these 5 core competencies as well as how it's nested within these larger structures at play. Thank you so much for kind of thinking about those 5 pieces. What I want to say here from the beginning is the more and more that Claire and I dig into this and the more we learn about SEL in our English learners, we are reminded that the goals of SEL are long-standing goals of Catholic education. Again, I'm going to read this quote to you, but a good school provides a rounded education for the whole person, right? So many of these kind of 5 core competencies relate to creating a student that is successful in terms of their homework, their relationships, managing anxiety, just becoming a whole, well-rounded, educated person. It continues and it says, a good Catholic school, over and above this, helps all of its students to become saints. So it's not lost on us that these are tangible skills that are overall achieving the goal that CASEL set out to create a kind, caring world and to bring forth the kingdom of God here on earth. So all of these things are aligned with the deep beliefs that you have as Catholic educators. So thank you for your good and incredible work here. So we want to start with a little bit of framing. Claire, do you want to add something? Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Katie. I'll add it in a minute.
Perfect. So we wanted to start with these 5 core competencies. We wanted to really help you see that you're doing so much of this good work by belief in educating the whole child. But I also want to layer in here a little bit of nuance about getting to understand who your English learners are. So an English learner, by federal definition, is a child for whom a language other than English is spoken at home. I want you to unpack that over time as well, but to think about getting to know what that means for your students. So, Claire, does that mean that your mom speaks Spanish, for example? Or does it mean that you and your siblings speak Mandarin with both sets of parents, right? What does it mean in terms of you being biliterate versus being bilingual? So there's a lot of ways that we need to come to understand our English learners better. In the classroom, though, it's really particularly important that you understand where students are in their language development process. So generally speaking, there are 5 stages of language acquisition. All of the major language assessments, LAS Links, WIDA, all of these are based on these general 5 stages. One thing to note is this is how almost all second language is acquired. And so no matter kind of how fluent someone is in their first language, they're still going to march through these 5 incredible stages. So I just want to take a moment here and frame these for you. There are 3 stages that we would like to point out as being obvious English learners or really kind of students in the early stages here. There's a silent period. It can take 0 to 6 months. A child can have 1 to 500 words. That's actually a pretty sizable vocabulary. It's really amazing what these children are doing in this first stage of language acquisition is tremendous. And I want to highlight one thing here. Claire, it says the silent period, because very often these children are intaking language and they're not necessarily producing language. But don't mistake that for them not being able to understand what you're saying.
And sometimes, Katie, we call these kids newcomer children. So children that have just arrived in the United States, or perhaps a child that enters pre-kindergarten or kindergarten and is encountering and interacting with English for the first time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Early production is your next stage. 6 months to a year, 1,000 words. Speech emergence, 1 to 3 years, 3,000 words. Simple sentences and some errors. What I want to point out here too is what WIDA calls these, the big language assessment calls these the can-do indicators. That I want you to always keep an eye toward what these students are able to do within these areas as well. So in the silent period, they can point, act out, match, and label. Early production, 1 or 2 word responses, speech emergence, some simple sentences. So we know that SEL strategies in these first 3 stages are going to look different than SEL strategies in the 4th and 5th stage of language acquisition. It's really important that you remember that students who are in this 4th and 5th stage of language acquisition are still English learners. So let's talk about intermediate fluency, 3 to 5 years, 6,000 words. Advanced fluency, 7 to 10 years. So I want you to think about this overall. It may take a child 7 to 10 years to become grade level fluent in academic English. I want you to know that, and I want you to know that their needs may be different all along the way.
So the 2 things I want to add on to that, Katie. The first is just to make sure that those of you that are watching understand that this spectrum doesn't necessarily align with the age of a child. So for example, if a child arrived in the United States for the first time in 4th grade, right, that child might be starting in this early language emergence stage, even though it's an older child. So one of the things that you're going to see that Katie and I do is try and give you some strategies that align with all of those 5 competencies that keep this spectrum in mind. So when we give you strategies that work very well for students in these early stages, it doesn't just mean for young learners. It can also be for learners who are older but are just beginning their process of acquiring English. So that's the first thing I wanted to add on to that, Katie. And then the second one is just a reminder to folks, those last 2 more advanced language stages, these are often the children that no longer sound like English learners on the playground, because their playground or their recess or their cafeteria English is really quite well developed, but that we're still seeing perhaps academic language gaps that we're helping them to fill. So we just need to remember to be careful that sometimes as language learners become more advanced, it can be easy to forget that they're still language learners.
100%. Thank you very much, Claire. Good points.
And obviously, it goes without saying that the socio-emotional needs of children apply in general to all children. All children need to learn skills like how to stay on top of homework, how to make sure that they're studying in advance for tests, thinking about ways that they can form strong relationships, ways that they can calm themselves when they get upset. But what we really hope to do today is throw a spotlight on some very unique needs that many English learners might or might not, depend. You know these students, so some might apply to the students in your school, some might not, that many English learners have in common. And one of the things that we know about English learners is that they're really doing superhuman work every single day that they walk in to a school. They are stretching and exercising their brains in ways that a monolingual English speaking writing child doesn't have to do. So let's just take a minute to think really about all of those extra lifts that an English learner often does in any given day. First off, they're working to acquire both content and the English language. So they are stretching their brains by learning a new language each and every single day. Very often, they have to navigate inter-ethnic relationships. So they're learning new customs, new norms, new expectations. They often have to navigate new cultural norms while honoring their own family cultural values. So the child that might walk into the cafeteria, look at everybody else's lunch, and look at his or her own lunch, right? And navigate, how those lunches might be the same or different, just as mode of example. These are students that sometimes for very valid reasons can feel on the outside of the school system, who might have a parent that feels like she doesn't belong or can't easily call the school office to explain what's going on at home. Some of them might face migration-related interrupted schooling or trauma if they've recently crossed a border, or potentially have family that are stuck on the other side of a border. And of course, some of our students might carry the anxiety of any issues related to the documentation of their families. So this is just an example of both the Herculean work that our students do as English learners on any given day, but also some of the unique SEL needs that they might face as learners. So right now I want to invite you to hit pause. Thank you, Katie, for being my Vanna White. To hit pause and think about the English learners that you serve at your school. And in each one of those symbolic weights, consider some of the amazing feats that they do in your school, or amazing challenges that they face in your school on any given day. And when you're ready, you can hit unpause and we'll keep going.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire. It's such a good reminder too, that as we're looking at these 5 core competencies of SEL, and we're layering in English learners, that we're really considering some of it's not just the weights, Claire, right? It's just literally, to your point, it's literally the strength that our children are demonstrating when they're coming to school every day and they're doing so many of these incredible things. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about these 5 core competencies. And you're going to see how we're going to talk about these in both the early language development stage and in the more advanced language development stage. And I'm up with the very first one, self-awareness. In this core competency, Castle urges us that children need to be self-aware and possess the ability to recognize one's own emotions and values, some of their weaknesses and their strengths, and to possess a well-grounded sense of self-efficacy and optimism. So in these very early stages of language development, some of this truly depends on the language that they have to express their feelings and their emotions. So at the early stages, let's consider a scenario where an English learner is frustrated on the playground. Claire, I've seen this in my own teaching. And an English learner in the early stages is very frustrated because he wants to play with his friends, or he wants the ball. And Claire, he just simply at that stage might not have the words to do that. So his frustration might come out in anger, and might come out in complete sadness. Very often a child in this stage just doesn't have the vocabulary to be able to express their emotions.
So can I interrupt with the classic example that I know you and I have talked about before, Katie, which would be a child that pushes or even hits another kid on the playground because he doesn't understand, or he doesn't have the language to be able to say, stop. 100%. I don't like that. I don't want to play this game anymore. Because he doesn't have the language, he doesn't know what else to do but to push or to hit. So this is, Katie, some of your visuals are offering students the capacity to express some of those emotions before it gets to a frustration point.
100%. So our strategy here in this early language development is that you're providing visual supports tied with language. So some of the ways we've seen this done in classrooms is our emotion boards, right? So any kind of quick visual that students can perhaps point to. So if you probably can't, but I'll zoom in a little bit and we talk about, I am angry, or I'm upset, or I'm frustrated. How am I feeling? Right. So a lot of these emotion boards are allowing your students to indicate to you how they're feeling, and then they're starting to map language onto this. And the next example right next to it with a little blue background, these are some sentence frames. I feel upset when, I am happy when. So really these emotion boards are centered on giving students an outlet for showing you how they're feeling when maybe they don't have the language yet. And they're also providing some really good language support so our students can begin to express language right at the tail end of this early language development, bridging to more advanced language, I think one thing that's really important that you can do is to begin to really kind of link content to language. So when you're reading about characters, for example, in your reading text, you can begin to build synonyms and saying things like, maybe this character is happy. Another way we could say happy could be jovial or cheerful or elated or blissful, right? We can begin to build our children's language and their network of language. So I'm going to take a pause here for just a second. In this early language development in your graphic organizer, write down how you've either seen emotion boards or how you could really work to build emotional vocabulary.
And Katie, I've got a great tip I haven't shared with you yet.
Go ahead, Claire.
I was on a school visit last week, and I actually saw a teacher that had on the back of her lanyard, where she had her keys and her ID, several emoji faces. And when a kid was starting, and this wasn't specific to English learners, I think this was just for all of her students, that they could point to a face and show her how they were feeling. I thought, what a clever way, because in having it on her lanyard, she always had it with her.
I love that there. I love that. And even some of our children who, to your point, maybe just be nonverbal or not using their language a lot in the very beginning. Absolutely. So again, what you're helping students to do is to develop self-awareness of how they're feeling. Let's look at our more advanced language development. So when students begin to possess a more advanced stages of language, self-awareness, I think at this stage can begin to focus more upon values and upon knowing oneself and one's story. So if you haven't ever seen these before, I'm a huge fan of Where I'm From poems. George Ella Lyon is a poet, and she created these beautiful frames, and you can literally just Google it, Where I Am From poem. And what this can allow students to do is to talk about using their senses, where they're from, what does it smell like, maybe even what it tastes like, what is some good imagery. So here's the teacher in me. That's parts of speech, Claire. That is metaphor. That is simile. But you're allowing children to have the space to reflect upon their own stories. Last little bit here is I have 3 little ones, and they love Encanto, right? And so if you haven't seen it yet, you have to see it. It's an incredible story. And one thing I love is that the youngest daughter, Maribel, eventually kind of reaches the point where she's really interested in her grandma's story of immigration, of migration, and of family formation. And so it's this intergenerational play. And so one thing I really encourage older students to do, or not older, you're right, Claire, are more advanced students in the more advanced stages of language development, really encourage you to build in incredible opportunities for them to interview others about their past, their culture, their language development. But what a great way to learn about self-awareness.
Absolutely. And the importance of telling diverse stories.
100%.
So really looking for the storybooks and the read alouds
Yep.
that invite your students to sometimes see themselves in the mirror, and other times to look out the window at the experience of others. Thank you, Katie.
Of course, friends. So take 30 seconds and pause us and write down some ideas about how you might work on self-awareness with your English learners. And we're going to continue on. Thank you.
So the next core competency is what we call self-management. This is the ability for a student to self-regulate, to control his or her emotions and his or her behaviors, to calm down, to settle, to focus, to engage, etc. So some strategies that I want to give you, particularly relating to students that are just only beginning to emerge as speakers and readers and writers and listeners of English, involve what I call total physical response, or what's known as TPR, right? Ways in which they learn to calm themselves that very often use their bodies. Sometimes in the field, these can be called brain breaks or energizers, things where students can move and reoxygenate. So one that I love You simply use your hand, all students have them, to calm students, to relax, to kind of bring their brain back to the center. Simply involves taking your finger, going up and down, tracing up and down. And every time that you go up, you breathe in. And every time you go down, you breathe out. And you do your entire hand. And if you get the sense that the students need more, well, then you bring in the other hand, right? So again, this allows all the children to participate because they're not producing language, but they're listening and understanding and calming themselves. Now, I want you to put on your hat as a teacher of emergent bilingual children. And let's think about the ways we can do this very same calming strategy, helping them to expand their vocabularies. So you might start with breathe up, breathe down. The next time you do it, you might say, we're going to take off and land. Take off, land. We want science words. Inhale, exhale. We want geography words. We might go mountain, breathe up the mountain, breathe down into the valley, right? We ascend, we descend. So these are all ways that we add vocabulary, help students learn to calm, reoxygenate, and honest to goodness, I'm not gonna lie, Katie, I have found myself from time to time in my kitchen doing the same thing when I find that my own children are bringing me to the brink. So anyway, again, not a huge language lift for kids that just need to calm down, and we can add on a linguistic sort of exercise when we get to that.
Always thinking about doing that, always.
I also want to show you just maybe 20 seconds of this video. This is in a kindergarten classroom. Unfortunately, it's me, and I'm warning you, I'm using a little bit of a kindergarten sing-song voice. But the reason I want to show you is because you'll be able to see that a lot of these energizers, getting students out of their seats, reoxygenating, using their muscle systems, can help teach vocabulary and reinforce academic content. So we're going to watch just a minute of me in a kindergarten class. And as you can see, the students have been learning about the life cycle of a plant in kindergarten. We're using total physical response. You guys are like, we're scientists. You're going to show me all the things that you've learned about the plant cycle with your fingers and your toes in your body. We're going to start as seeds. Get down on the ground like you're a little bitty seed. Little, show me your seeds. Good. Next, we are going to sprout. I want you to take one hand and show me your roots with your fingers. Sprout your roots into the soil to take a drink of water, and then take your other hand and sprout a little stem up above the soil to get some sun and the energy. Good. Now we're going to grow into seedlings. Grow into the seedling. Good. Keep growing up to the sun. Now our toes are our roots. Wiggle your toes and drink the water. Grow your stem tall. Take your hands and grow leaves and get energy from the sun. Keep growing. Blow in the wind. Grow flowers or fruit. It's summer. Okay. Uh-oh. Now it's autumn. It's fall. Start to dry out. Wither, drop your seeds. That's right, Billy. Drop your seeds. Okay. I need to see a bunch of seeds again, because now you're a seed in the ground. Curl back up into a seed. Okay. Ready? Take one hand and grow your roots. Okay, so we did that several times. Katie, here's your quiz, your spontaneous quiz that I didn't warn you about.
Oh gosh.
What were some academic vocabulary words that kids acted out with their bodies? Do you remember some?
I love you were talking about seedling, and you were talking about growing and roots and stems. Absolutely.
Sprout, and we did that 2 or 3 times as a cycle.
100%.
It's a great way to get students up and out of their seats when you feel like they need a chance to move around before they get in trouble. And you may be thinking, oh, that's fine because it's a kindergarten class. This would never work in my 8th grade social studies class. And I really challenge you to rethink that. I've taught this way even in high school, and you might be surprised how much students really just intuit how good it feels to move and to stretch. So let's very quickly move up into what my TPR, right? We're moving up into a more advanced language skills. Another way that you can think about ways to teach self-management is to offer students role-playing scenarios. But because you're working with English language learners and emergent bilingual children, you're also thinking, how do I really support and teach language in everything I do? So if you have them working through scenarios, you're really thinking about providing sentence stems, like really strong sentence starters or frames that helps them be able to use the language that they have. So what would you do if someone pushed you on the playground? Okay, and you're providing the other student maybe on a little card. I would. Now, what have you just scaffolded for them? The conditional tense in English, right? Using the idea of might or would. Another example would be, what are three things you can do when you feel frustrated or you feel angry? And in this case, I might be really trying to reinforce sequential language. So I might give them a card or have something on my board that says, please make sure you use your fingers, and give at least 3 ideas. First, I'll take a deep breath. Then, or next, or if you really want to get advanced in your language, subsequently, finally, or in conclusion. So really giving them the chance to think through what they would do when certain aggravating or difficult or joyful situations arrive, and providing the kind of language supports so they can think through it and also be able to share the ideas that they have. Yeah. Okay. I invite you to take a minute and jot down 1 or 2 notes before we move on. You can hit pause and join us when you're ready. The next core competency is social awareness. So social awareness means the ability to relate to others, to empathize with others, to promote positive interactions within the classroom, and then by extension, right, out and into the world. So I want to just broadly invite all of you to investigate further, to research further what happens in what we call morning meetings. And very often at the middle school level, that's called advisory, or up the grades, this could be advisory or homerooms. If you Google morning meeting, this is a strategy that's at this point been widely developed. I think that was originated by responsive classrooms, which is just an amazing approach to building socio-emotional skills and academic skills in the classroom. So this is just a pitch for go Google the elements of a morning meeting. There's a couple. I want to throw a spotlight on 2 here today. So the first is how important it is for students to learn to greet one another. And I'm gonna show about 10 seconds of a greeting from this classroom, and I want to know what you notice.
Good morning, dear Annalise. Good morning, Karen. Good morning. Good morning, dear Annalise. I think before any learning.
Okay, Katie, that was it. What are 1 or 2 things that you noticed in that simple greeting?
Absolutely. I noticed, Claire, how they were looking each other in the eye. They were using names. They were learning to shake hands. I also noticed just how comfortable they were addressing one another.
So one of the things that I think is just so crucial is that students learn to address each other by name. And of course, when we're working with English learners, let's just take a minute to throw a spotlight on something that's really important. That we pronounce our students' names correctly. We learn to pronounce our students' names correctly. That Jorge does not become George, that Celeste doesn't become Celeste, right? As I always like to say to my students, I want to know how your mom, like, how does your mom pronounce your name? Because I'm always on team mom. I want to know how your mom, like, what your mom and dad named you. And if you're patient with me, I want to learn to say it correctly. And eventually this whole class will. So, so actually, Katie, I was a substitute this morning in a third grade classroom, and we did a morning meeting, and I want to give you all some ideas of ways that can be really fun for students to learn to greet each other on any given morning. So you noticed we always use a name. So you can teach students, and again, think about your English learners that might be learning new customs and norms, etc. You might say, this morning, we're going to greet each other like we're cowboys. So instead of saying good morning, we're going to say howdy. Howdy, Katie. Oh, you're muted. Katie said howdy, Claire, right?
Howdy,
I might turn to the person next to me. You might greet each other formally. So instead of saying, good morning, Katie, I might say, good morning, Mrs. LaShawn, or good morning, Dr. LaShawn. You would say, good morning, Mrs. Roach, right? So that students love that because it means they're greeting each other like using their last names. You can use different languages. So you might say, you know, today we're going to greet each other using Spanish. So we'll say, buenos dias, Katie. Buenos dias, Claire.
Buenos dias, Claire.
Sure thing. So, and obviously you can use different, you might, if you have a student, or if you don't have a student that comes from an Asian country, you might choose to greet one another with a bow. You might choose to greet one another with a fist pump. Very important to say names. This morning in my morning meeting, Katie, I did something called a snowball fight. This one never grows old. They absolutely love it. Every child writes his or her name down on a piece of paper. They crumple that up. They throw it into the middle. Then all the kids get to pick a snowball. They open up their paper, and that is the child that they greet that morning. So it's going across the classroom. But I'm telling you, this technique never grows old, and it is so important. And the exciting thing is that early language producers can fully participate.
They can fully participate. I agree.
Yeah, there's lots of fun. You know, if you're Katie, it could be good morning, kind Katie. Good morning, charismatic Claire. You can do things where whatever the person claps, everybody else has to repeat. It's a really, really wonderful way to start off your morning and to help students interact with one another. So I want to now take this up the language continuum a little bit. And I decided to look at some strategies that you might use in advisory. So now we're also talking about age-wise students in 4th, 5th grade up into middle school. So an element of advisory or morning meeting is that you play a short game every morning that allows students to interact in really positive ways. It gets everybody talking to one another. So the game I played this morning, although we played it in Spanish because I was in a Spanish immersion class, was what we called warm wind blows. Again, this is a tried and true one. They're all sitting on the circle. I always make sure there's one less carpet square or one less chair. It's a bit like musical chairs. I name a category, forgive me. A warm wind blows on anyone that's wearing blue shoes. And everyone with blue shoes has to get up and run and find a new seat. And inevitably, there will be one child that does not have a seat because there isn't one left. That is the next name or category caller. So then that kid gets up and says, a warm wind blows on any of you that like to eat tamales, right? Or any of you who live with a grandparent in your house, or any of you that like to watch a certain show or root for a certain team, right? Students are interacting in wholesome ways. Another game that I absolutely love is called Name 3 Things. So again, this is a great way to expand vocabulary. So students are working with each other. Good morning, Katie. Name 3 things that you, and then I usually provide a word. So to start with, it might be something simple like or love. But it's a great way to teach a vocabulary word. like loathe. Name 3 things that you loathe. What does loathe mean? Well, loathe is another way to say hate, or enjoy, or avoid, or savor, or relish, detest, or tolerate, right? Again, you're totally expanding students' vocabulary, but you're doing it in a way that is fun and in which they get to interact with each other in very positive ways and spaces. So if you don't know much yet about a morning meeting or an advisory, I really suggest you research that on the web to help develop your students, purposefully develop your students' social awareness and give them opportunities to interact with each other in positive and fun ways on any given day. You can hit pause if you want to take some notes and unpause when you're ready to move on. Okay, on to the next core competency, which is relationship skills. So relationship competencies often reflect a student.
Sorry, Claire, I don't mean to interrupt you. Can you hit slideshow for me? I'm having trouble seeing. Need my glasses anyway. So there you go. I just want to make it bigger.
I think when I showed the video, I forgot to go back to full screen.
No, you're totally fine. I wanted to make sure I could see the word buddy bench. Thanks, Claire.
So, yeah, absolutely. So relationship competencies reflect a student's ability to make positive connections with others by doing things like listening well, communicating effectively, compromising, etc. So on our early language development spectrum, I invite you to create spaces in which your students are learning to interact with other students in the classroom that don't necessitate a huge language load, right? That are safe and relaxing spaces for your language learners. Classic would be a buddy bench, right? And all the students understand this isn't just for emergent bilingual children, this is for all our children. This is a place where you can go and sit down, be yourself and relax. And it's a visual trigger for other students to come and accompany you and sit by you. I'm sure most of you know what a buddy bunch is. Some other ideas would be games that students can play in the classroom that don't have massive language demands. So 2 great examples are Uno and Blockus. You're probably familiar with Uno. Blockus is a little bit more of an advanced game. It's kind of got the same principles as Tetris. I absolutely love it. Kids love it. You don't need a lot of language to play it. So this is really a way that you're helping foster interaction and friendship between students who are native speakers of English and maybe a student who's just beginning to use or to learn English. Is there any other game you can add, Katie, that you can think of?
I know that we've done this in some of our ESL classes, even just go fish, even just asking to be able to communicate and to ask for, but there's something so beautiful about kind of this reciprocal pieces of language. And that's what we're going to get at for our children is to feel comfortable and safe. And as you said, to feel safe and to interact with one another.
And, you know, I've even had these conversations with my own children. So I was talking to Marie the other day and she said, oh, Rocio in my class, you know, and I said, oh, that's wonderful. And Marie sort of was trying to say, well, I don't really know what to say to her. Like, I don't know how to interact with Rocio because she's just learning English. And when you provide these kinds of spaces and games, all of a sudden it's like the grease, right? Yep. Oh, now I know I can play Uno and I'm teaching Rocio how to do this or go fish or I sit on the bench, etc. So what are some things that promote those kinds of relationship skills, being able to listen, being able to communicate effectively up the language spectrum for English learners? And one of the things that I found, this is not rocket science, is teaching certain phrases explicitly. So, and then challenging your students to use them all day or all week. And there's fun little incentives anytime someone uses it, you know, and I hear it, or they get to put a marble into my marble jar, or what have you, they get a fist pump from me. So manners, I think we can all say all children in America these days need help with manners, but in a very special way, our English learners need to be taught the types of phrases that we might use to get people's attention, right? Or how to interact in a game. So examples would be, pardon me, right? I know this is not rocket science, but really teaching all, and this is not just a first grade skill. We can remind our 11th graders how we use the word pardon me or excuse me, right? Instead of whatever their text.
Hey.
Yeah, hey, right? Please wait your turn, right? Instead of pushing back or saying, hey, please wait your turn. I'm not done yet. Or if, you're assigning roles within a game, oh, you can count on me to be the banker in Monopoly or what have you. Same thing goes for clarifying questions. Again, these are really academic skills for students, but in a special way for our bilingual children, our multilingual children, it can be a way for them to check that they really understand what it is that someone just said or told them. If I understood you correctly, you said that, and then repeating back. So again, this is encouraging a child to develop a synopsis or show the person that they're interacting with that they are listening attentively by parroting it back. Another example, to summarize, you just said, you should try, Katie, what was the game? Go Fish. To summarize, Katie, you just told me that I should try I should invite my students to play Go Fish, right? Right. I like your ideas. Could you tell me more about helping students to elicit and expand? So really making sure that we're teaching these oracy skills, right? We're teaching communicative skills very explicitly, that we're really throwing a spotlight on them. We're not just hoping that they get taught along the way, that we're taking time to make sure. And this is just another example of how great teachers of English learners tend to benefit every child.
100%. 100%. And Claire, I was going to say too, what strong models of language? I mean, if there's anything that's obvious here to me, it's that we need to remember that just the way we explicitly instruct social studies and math and science, we need to explicitly instruct these forms of language with strong sentence frames and strong models. And then we need to hold ourselves and our students accountable for it. But these are all just great reminders literally across the spectrum here, Claire. Thank you very much.
Good thing.
All right, friends, I have the pleasure of talking about our 5th competency here. So if you want to pause me for just a moment and circle back and kind of write down and summarize anything on the relationship skills, go ahead and do that right now. And for those of you who want to continue, here we go. We're going to talk about responsible decision-making. So responsible decision-making is the capacity to make choices based on realistic evaluations of consequences, a kind of everyone's well-being, ethics, maybe even safety, and what are the social norms. So some of these things all kind of culminate up the chain to me in terms of responsible decision-making. So personally, I think that we can never underestimate the power of routines, particularly in the early stages of language development. We need to have strong routines in order to establish classrooms that feel safe and one in which that students feel that they can understand the expectations and consequences. And probably most importantly, Claire, that they can just know what's going to come next.
They can predict what's happening next.
Absolutely. So for a lot of our English learners, sometimes if you can, as shown in this example here, it says our day, it shows the tasks through images, and it shows what equipment or what materials they will need. You're taking some of the guesswork out of it, but you're also providing a lovely space where children can concentrate a little bit more on your language, on your content, when you can at least address what comes next. What am I going to do? What do I need to do to be prepared? Also for English learners too, our days are long, 8 hours a day. Claire, in a language that's not your first language.
Right.
I also too just want to know how many things I need to do to get through lunch, right? I mean, we just all need to know. So I really recommend having strong routines, but having them communicated very, very clearly. This doesn't have to be a picture board. It could also just be really clearly written agendas with images by them as well. But think about how much consistency matters.
Right. I just want to add one thing, Katie, and that's for teachers in the middle and high school settings. That we think of like your daily routines and we associate that with early elementary.
Sure. But like even knowing your schedule.
Exactly. So you always start your class with
Mhm.
a bell ringer, a whatever. So that when that student walks into your class, he or she knows, I put down my backpack, I get out my marbled journal, or I get
Yep.
out my Chromebook, or I get out whatever it is. There's a safety in understanding what's always going to happen when I walk into that.
100%. And along those lines too, knowing where homework is posted.
Exactly.
This also extends to families. I think families need to understand the routines of the day, the classroom, pickup. We just need to be really aware of having things that are consistent and making sure that all stakeholders understand. In the middle here, it was an image of two children. I think the bridge between early language development and more advanced language development, I think this idea of a buddy support system transcends both of these kind of ends of the spectrum. It is so valuable that our students are paired with other students, and you know all of your students well enough to know who would make a great buddy. In the early language development stage, it's probably really important that you find someone who potentially speaks the same language as the student, if that's at all possible. But having someone where they can safely ask the questions of, what are we doing? What comes next? Can you clarify for me? We have a beautiful example that came out of one of our schools, and these students were in middle school, where one of the students, the presentation said, for your high school visit tomorrow, you need to wear khaki pants. And the teacher overheard a middle school student lean over to the other one and said, what are khaki pants? And the student quickly got on his computer and Googled an image of khaki pants. How do you create classroom spaces where your students feel comfortable asking those questions? So thinking very intentionally about how you're creating buddy systems and routines. As you get up the grade, not up the grades, as you get up the, I have a tendency to say that, as you get kind of up the stages of language development, part of this can be a little bit in my mind around kind of unpacking what are the rules, what are the consequences, really thinking through their thoughts. And so I love a good reflection sheet. I love a good thought process worksheet here, but this one I really liked, Claire, where it just talked about, this is how I'm feeling. This is how I can see my peers. This is how I repair this. So some people call these restorative sheets, right? But I just thought it was really good. Sometimes our students that are in these more advanced stages have a little bit more language capacity, but they're still thinking through how they're interacting with others, and how they can make the most responsible decisions. So with this in mind, we just really want you to begin to think through these core competencies of SEL. And again, there are 5 of these core competencies, and we hope today that you were able to layer them in with what is best practice for our English learners. So here's what we set out to do today. We hope that you were able to, number 1, define socio-emotional learning, and that you begin to think a little bit about how this applies to your English language learners. We want you to really recognize and advocate that SEL is a core pillar of Catholic education and educating the whole child and caring for the whole child, and forming scholars and saints. And we want you to apply 5 to 10 SEL strategies aligned with the core competencies to address the needs of English learners. Our email addresses are at the very top of this presentation as well. And you can find them on our website where you found your graphic organizer. We want to see your great images from your morning meeting. Tell us how things are going. And we wish you all the best in supporting the socio-emotional needs of your English learners and ensuring their success. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.